All right, we're going to head over to the East Coast where we've got Mr. Joe Sinnott, Witting Partners, former oil and gas professional, still is, I guess, because he does a lot of oil and gas professional work, but he actually worked for an oil and gas company that went through a merger and acquisition. So it's always fun to get his insight on that. But like anytime with mergers and acquisitions, people are involved. And I always think of the people first because when departments consolidate and centralize their force and centralize their power, you usually have layoffs that happen afterwards. And so we're going to kind of get ahead a little bit and talk with Joe Sinnott about one, the big merger that happened this morning, and then find out how he would coach some of these individuals that are with those companies. So Joe Sinnott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, Jason. Happy to be here as always.
Did you see the news out in your neck of the woods that there was a pretty big merger today that happened? It might have happened over the weekend, but Devon Energy and Coterra announced the $58 billion shale merger. Has that made your news waves down there?
Of
Up
course,
there?
although of course it has to compete here in Western Pennsylvania with the bigger news, that being Punxsutawney Phil, about
Oh.
90 minutes north of where I'm sitting here today, making his prediction. That is 6 more weeks of winter. But yes, nevertheless, there was enough bandwidth there to also see today's announced but not unexpected news about Devon and Coterra.
Now, that is so cool. I didn't realize you were that close to the actual groundhog of Groundhog's Day, my favorite day of the year, Groundhog's Day. I mean, just fantastic when you get a bunch of people to party around a groundhog. You got to love it. You know, over 50% of the people believe it's real, like that he is a real soothsayer, a real predictor of the winter weather. They don't realize it's just kind of a fun way. And the first Groundhog's Day, they actually ate Puxatawny Phil. That's after he predicted it, they ate him. That was the first one. And then I think they realized, well, we probably don't want to do that. But anyway, a little trivia note for you there today. Did he
Trivia,
see his
and maybe
shadow?
an insult, Jason. I mean, the insinuation that it's not real, it's not legitimate, that Phil is not actually making a legitimate prediction. I don't,
I
if it's
should
really
have
50% of the
qualified and
people, how do you
asked
know
you
that I'm
if
not one of them?
I was going to say I should have qualified and asked if you were one of those individuals over the 50 percentile who did believe. And so thank you for making me feel this big right now. But there we go. That's what we're talking about interpretations, about don't assume or you'll make an ass out of you and me. You don't hear that too often these days, but that's what they used to tell me when I was a kid, that when you assume, you're making an ass out of you and me. And so let's talk a little bit about this big shale merger that happened, a 58 billion with a B. Basically, you've got, I'm taking a look here that as I look, the Delaware Basin, the Permian, the Marcellus Shale, the Anadarko Basin. But really, the driver of this whole thing is the Marcellus shale play with the Permian. I believe that is the secondary, might be equal when it's all said and done. But for right now, the prolific Marcellus is definitely the driver in this. What are people saying out there, Joe? And either at the churches, at the grocery store, at the cafes, but also you are very connected within the industry. Have you talked to anybody about this at all?
Well, not since the official news this morning, but certainly in the lead up here. Like I said, I mean, this has been the chatter now for a while, so not a big surprise this morning. But, in essence, Jason, here in the heart of the Marcellus, as much as we would like to believe that the Marcellus was a big player in this, the reality is, I mean, this Marcellus is second fiddle, if not third fiddle to
Oh,
all of
really?
this.
With all the gas and everything?
Yeah, despite, again, I mean, just like with Punxsutawney Phil here, we have our biases here, and we will. I certainly will tout the Marcellus till I'm blue in the face, which is a lot easier these days given the temperatures we're facing here. But nevertheless, the Delaware Basin certainly trumps, I think, the synergies, the operational synergies, if you will, that are being touted here for this deal, with the Marcellus really being more of a question, Jason. So, honestly, in terms of the chatter in this part of the world, it's all right. Well, what does that mean for the Marcellus? Obviously, you don't have to go back too long when the Marcellus assets that Coterra has had, were Cabot. It was Cabot Oil and Gas, and it was really, well, I think it was Cabot just gas, basically, in the prolific, very prolific part of the Marcellus Shale, northeastern Pennsylvania. But when Cabot merged with Cimarex there a couple years ago, that was sort of the beginning of the Marcellus not really being the headliner, Jason, and that's only continuing here with this deal. So that's sort of the filter through which those here in Pennsylvania are looking at today's announcement.
Well, this is a confession here because I skimmed the story this morning and I assumed, again, ass out of you and me, I assumed Coterra was going to keep the name because of the recent name change and a few, but Devon Energy is going to retain the name, headquartered in Houston, significant operations in Oklahoma City. And so no wonder I misspoke, because I thought that the Marcellus assets were the driver in this, but no, it's the Devon Energy. And Marcellus, I get it that it's kind of going through a little bit of some changes, but when you look at the bigger picture, I think Susquehanna, how do you pronounce it? Susquehanna County, number 1 or 2 in the nation for natural gas production. And the AI centers that are coming up, they need natural gas. They cannot operate without natural gas. Most of these AI centers can't. I just talked to somebody today who's working on the Ellendale, North Dakota AI Center. Okay, we're talking about the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere, right? Well, North Dakota's in the middle of nowhere. And then so you're talking about even further in the middle of nowhere along the North Dakota, South Dakota border, a little town called Ellendale. And talking to one of the contractors, and he's convinced this is not going to work unless they have their own grid system built there with natural gas. And this guy's been working in energy and whatever for his whole career, actually. It took over his family business, so he knows it very well. And so that's where I was going with the Marcellus, that I would think the Marcellus would be growing, even though the chatter might be different with all the energy transition talk and the ESG talk and the DEI talk and all this other stuff that they try to attach to the world of energy. I look at the bigger picture, which is if people want to ask Surrey a question, they need natural gas. It's just that easy for me, Joe. Is anybody having these conversations out there, or is the energy transition talk still dominating the medias?
Oh, AI is the dominant conversation, Jason. It's inescapable here in Pennsylvania, I think elsewhere, but certainly Pennsylvania. And again, I don't know that there's anybody, I shouldn't say anybody, certainly the majority of intellectually honest people here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would agree that, our modern existence basically depends on natural gas. Anything that requires electrons, well, where do those electrons come from? Here in Pennsylvania, 60% of them are generated from natural gas. So again, it's inescapable, the connection between AI and natural gas. And, it's tough to go a day or, certainly at least a week here without having access to an AI conference here in Pennsylvania, Jason. So you're spot on in terms of the importance of natural gas, even though, again, for this particular deal, that's not really the headline, if you will.
The pro forma projection is expected to exceed 1.6 million barrels of oil equivalent per day for the new merger. Joe, let me give you a little bit of a scale on that. North Dakota as a state puts out about 1 million a day. So that means this new company is going to do 1.6 million a day. So they're technically now the third largest state. Because the Permian is one, Texas is one. Sorry, East Texas. I didn't mean that. That was a slip up. Texas is number 1. I believe New Mexico took number 2 because of the Permian down there by Hobbs and Carlsbad and that area. But then North Dakota was number 3 at around 1 million, and we dipped under, went up. We're between 900 and 1.2 million barrels a day. This new merger, these guys are going to produce 1.6 million barrels a day, Joe. I mean, they're their own little country. So let's talk about some of the people involved here, because layoffs They always follow mergers and acquisitions. I've never known a company not to do it. And if, by the way, and if you're a company that didn't lay off your HR department when the two HR departments merged, let me know. If you're one of the marketing departments that survived when two marketing departments became one, good for you, because that's pretty rare that they keep two of those. Pretty rare. And so, Joe, we've got some human aspects here to talk about because the pulse of the country is already layoffs. I mean, John Deere laid off 600 people down in Iowa 5 hours from here, and they moved their operations down to Mexico because of AI. They're going into AI tractors and AI equipment, and so they don't need humans anymore. And talk to me a little bit about that. You're an executive coach, so you coach people, but you also help people build businesses, and you've been through this before. You've been part of a merger and acquisition, and so what advice do you have for those people that might be wondering if they're going to have a job in 3 months?
Yeah, well, and just to add a little more color, Jason, even in my day to day, I still do a fair amount of career coaching. I still work with people who are in career transition or want to be in career transition or expect to be in career transition. And there are definitely some common themes that emerge, some of which were on full display in my former life when I was helping to lead teams through a multi-billion-dollar transaction like the one that was announced this morning. And one of the things, Jason, you mentioned earlier about the danger of assumptions, right? One of the first things that I found leading teams through that is to focus on what you do know. You can assume all kinds of things. There's always going to be rumors and hearsay and speculation. That's human, right? But from a leadership standpoint, if you're leading a team of people who are concerned, as again, I think any of the 3,000 plus people who are part of Coterra or Devon would be concerned right now. Well, the first thing is, well, let's stick with what we do know. And it might not be much, but by and large, it's typically, there's more certainty than people might realize because it's easier to focus on the doom and gloom. So I'll stop there, Jason, and we can expound and go down, a path of other themes that I see. But whether I'm working with an individual now from a formal coaching capacity or even informally years ago leading a team through something similar, it's to take a breath and say, all right, well, what do we know? What do we have at our disposal? What is not changing is one of the great questions you can ask. And that helps, again, slow people down just a little bit, get a little bit of that certainty, and then you can start going down the speculation and everything else, Jason. So again, the danger of assumptions, is as famous or infamous as that line might be about, the danger of assuming. Well, it's just as important here when you find yourself caught up in something like what was announced this morning.
More details on the merger acquisition. Combined Devon Coterra entity will control nearly 750,000 net acres in the Delaware Basin alone. The Delaware Basin is in Texas, I do believe. And the Permian as well. I'm taking a look at some of the different things. Small to mid-tier operators in particular have grappled with rising costs and limited inventory growth, making strategic combinations increasingly attractive. This deal follows the surge in energy sector M&A activity in the recent years, including the ExxonMobil's major acquisition in the Permian, highlighting the broader shift towards scale and operational efficiency. And Joe, we've joked about this before in the past where I think in my lifetime, you're going to see Exxon, Verizon, Chipotle be a company because they're going to have to grow. Another conversation I was having this morning was a veterinarian. They're getting out of the business. Venture capital firms have changed the veterinarian business to the tune to where he's now being pressured to ask all of his clients and use emotional persuasion about teeth cleaning for dogs. It's a $5,000 procedure. And if you have, pet insurance, well, great. You can get that under there and this and that and everything. Point is, there's such a push now for grow, grow, grow. At some point, you have to stop growing and you just have to sustain. And right now the oil and gas industry is very much in the grow phase, and anyone who's trying to sustain, they're actually kind of falling behind. And I think about it, a lot of the mid and small operators that do not have the leverage and the capital to do this. And so it does become a little bit an issue, and it can become a little bit concerning, especially for family businesses, because they might have to leave the industry completely and figure out something completely new to do if, the AI and oil and gas and carbon industry are gonna come together, and then ag as well. So, what advice do you have for people that have their job, and maybe they made it through the merger, but they might want to go do their own thing? They might, listen, it's like this vet, this poor guy. It's all he's never known is how to do his veterinarian work, and now he's got to go find a whole new career because his new bosses that all of a sudden came out of nowhere that work in some bank in New York are telling him, if you do not ask all your clients to get teeth cleaning, well, you're fired. Okay, I own this business. You're still fired. Okay. So you see where there's a little bit of a problem there, Joe. What do you say for those people that they don't know what to do, but they know that they got to do something? Because as I mentioned, if you are trying to sustain your business right now, you are falling behind because everyone else is growing, growing, growing.
Yeah. So that being said, let's play off of that word grow, Jason. Whether it's an individual or a business, you need to be clear about what you mean by the word grow. Because, you go back 10, 12 years in our industry, especially, again, I'll speak through the lens of somebody in the natural gas industry at the time. Well, it was grow, grow, grow. That's how companies were being rewarded, right? Growing production year over year, to the point where growth became a dirty word because, to your point, Jason, that wasn't sustainable. Whereas now when a company says, hey, we need to grow, it's typically, grow in terms of becoming more profitable, right? Increasing profit margins, reducing risk, becoming more capital efficient, all of those various things. So it's a different definition of growth, but it no longer looks like production growth. And it's the same for an individual, right? You can say, hey, I want to grow, I want to keep growing. And if I'm, faced with being laid off from my job, oh, that's going to set me back. I was on this nice trajectory and everything else. Whereas again, my job as a coach is to slow people down and say, all right, well, not just the cliche, what is the end goal, but hey, what would have you jumping up and down 10, 20 years from now? Like that's where we should be headed, not some sort of arbitrary ladder or stair steps or whatever visual you want to have for your career. So getting clear about what growth is, because just like a company might grow in terms of, boosting their margins, lowering their costs, et cetera, an individual can grow by, gaining more control of his or her time, or feeling like they're on a more sustainable path that is de-risked, that isn't dependent on having a nice, stable, normal job that can, be taken away in a heartbeat thanks to M&A. So again, Jason, that's the key for people, to slow them down and say, all right, well, what are we growing towards? What is the definition of, success for you? And as cliche and sort of, I don't know, high level as that can sound, it's critically important, especially for a lot of the sort of hardened individuals of the oil and gas industry, a lot of the stereotypical engineers. I say that as a stereotypical engineer who, again, might see things as more black and white. It can be difficult to talk in terms of, hey, how do you want to feel, 10, 20 years from now in terms of your career, if not your personal life? But without that clarity, Jason, you're going to find yourself growing, again, unconsciously and perhaps unsustainably, like a lot of oil and gas companies of a dozen years ago.
I'm seeing a lot of people too that do side hustles and are trying to start a company while working for another company, and mitigate risk is what they're trying to do on their personal financial level, and even from a company level, I guess. When you're going through one of these mergers, and if you do have the ability to maybe go start your own thing, I would think that this would be one of those times where you probably could talk to your superiors, because they might give you a severance package and help you out. I mean, what I'm saying is you might make their job easier because they got to lay off people and they don't like laying off people. But if you come to them, they might help you become one of those layoffs in a way that saves face for everybody and helps your situation out more than what it could be eventually anyway. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? To where if a lot of people would think, no, I'm not going to say anything to anybody. I'm going to shut up and try to keep my job. Actually, the opposite might be better in this situation. I mean, read the room, but talk to me a little bit about that to where it's an opportunity that might not exist otherwise.
Yeah, well, Jason, I mean, here's what I would say to that. The healthiest cultures that I work with are cultures where that's happening long before there's rumblings of potential mergers and acquisitions and synergies and layoffs and all of that. The healthiest cultures are ones where, yeah, people can talk openly about, what they want. People can talk openly about their fears that if they were let go tomorrow, they would struggle landing a job. They can talk openly with their manager who can say, well, let's get your resume to the point where you can work and not be worried, not be scared. I want you to be here because you want to be here, but I also want you working in a way that you're not, looking over your shoulder. You're not working, with an extra level of anxiety. Jason, that's a healthy culture. And ideally, again, that's happening, without any hint of something going amiss. But the problem is, and again, companies that I work with, there are certainly, human resources people out there who, probably heard me on my soapbox. But, the reality is it's uncomfortable to say, all right, wait, you mean we're going to go out there and actively encourage managers to tell their employees to polish up their resume so that, if they don't have a job next week, they should feel secure. Clearly that is understandably uncomfortable, but that is absolutely the ideal, Jason. You want people at your company who are safe, who are secure, who feel like whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, they can go forth and get another job tomorrow, but they don't and they aren't because they want to stay, because they're engaged, because they have the trust of a company who is willing to talk openly about such things. So, Jason, not only is that critical to do now when, people are faced with a couple of months, say, before, things are closed and things start happening, if you will, to be somewhat euphemistic. This can be happening at any time for any company under any circumstances, Jason. So again, not only do I agree, but I think this should be the standard.
WTX Energy back in 2021, Devon Energy merged with them as well. I was kind of just checking some of their past acquisitions as well. Boy, they're really positioning themselves in a whole new way. This is a Coterra, they were the biggest company out there, weren't they? On the East Coast? They were one of the bigger ones?
They were one of the, Cabot, again,
Cabot,
even
yeah.
before the merger with Cimarex. Yeah, Cabot was up there. I don't know, with all the bouncing ball. I mean, they were certainly at some point top 3 or 4, and still are, top 3 or 4 producers of natural gas coming out of the ground here in Pennsylvania.
I always forget like Shell's out there and some of, BP and some of the other bigger Hess and that sort of thing. But how's life going for you? Job wise, business wise, are you staying busy these days, coaching people, or what's going on there?
Yeah, still busy, still enjoying it. Still plenty of folks, again, whether it's on the individual front or on the corporate sponsored front, still plowing along, still coaching, still loving this here as I, in the midst of you're number 7 here as an executive coach, building on 15 years of more traditional, if you will, oil and gas roles, Jason.
Now, what's a corporate sponsorship? Because I guess I was kind of under the impression you did a lot of workshops and training and one-on-one coaching and that sort of thing. Do you do corporate speeches and stuff like that too?
Well, I do, but when I say corporate sponsorship, I mean a company is paying for me to come in and support them in any number of ways, whether it's a speaking engagement, whether it's working with people one-on-one, whether it's a workshop. Typically, it's a combination of those different things, as opposed to people who are reaching out and paying out of pocket, or an individual who's looking to start up, his or her own company, for example, Jason. So corporate sponsored is I'm engaged with them, I'm on their books, if you will, versus an individual who says, Joe, I need support. I need support, whether they're, working for a company and, maybe they don't have the option to have the company pay for it. Although I will say when I'm talking with people, again, it's, well, hey, lean on the resources you do have. I'd love to help you. But first and foremost, what does the company offer, Jason? That's typically the first question to ask, of course. And then, helping them guide to, hey, take advantage of what's already in front of you. Take advantage of what's at your disposal, which I would encourage anybody, again, especially the employees of Devon and Coterra, to say, all right, well, slow down. What resources are available? What resources are going to be made available? What can you do right now to leverage your existing network before kind of entering panic mode and feeling like you need to, outrun your peers to get a leg up? The best way to get a leg up, Jason, is to acknowledge what's already at your disposal and lean into that. So anyway, long answer to a simple question there, Jason, but I think that kind of covers the spectrum of how I'm typically engaged with individuals or with groups of individuals.
Now, we've had conversations about how you've talked with people and done workshops leading up to, say, a merger and acquisition, and months and months before. And then we've had conversations about after it happens, you come in and kind of help reset the culture based on the new owner's vision and that sort of thing. Have you ever been hired to come in during like while the merger is happening, like right now, so that people who are worried or whatever, they have somewhere that they can go to that is not necessarily the company? You're almost like an arbitrator, but not an arbitrator. You're almost like Switzerland. You'd be this neutral place where people can vent or talk or whatever. Obviously, you'd be paid for by the parent company, so the people have to understand you're not going to turn on the parent company. You're just there to help facilitate some of the uncomfortable communications in a coaching way that might help somebody understand that they have talents that could be better served elsewhere, or they have talents that are required internally because they know where all the bodies are buried digitally, or whatever the case is. I don't know what the modern day phrase is, because nowadays, if you say you know where the bodies are, people get a little triggered by that. And so out in your neck of the woods where waste management is, everybody has that in the Italian world. It's a little bit different how you got to say
easy
that.
now, Jason. You're talking to somebody from northern New Jersey who is also an Italian citizen, by the way. So you got to be careful there, leaning into those stereotypes about, my paisans and our connection to making bodies disappear, if you will.
Oh, I wonder if The Sopranos helped or hurt that industry. Oh man, it's so funny. But anyway, back to the question. Has anybody ever hired you like during the actual merger period? Because that is what, about a 90-day period, a 60-day period of when it actually.
Yeah, that's typical timelines. And here's the funny thing, if not the ironic thing, Jason. Even though this is the period of time when you want that support, right? Where people are clamoring for an independent resource to help them navigate these things, to help them, to your point, figure out what their strengths are, figure out how they're different from everybody else that's going to potentially be looking for a job, or, figuring out how they can, convince management that they should remain in their current position or current location or whatever. Even though that these are the times when it is most valuable, typically what happens, Jason, is there tends to be kind of a pause here. So yeah, there's no shortage of consultants that are coming in with, to help with transitions and everything else. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, when you need this help, it's, hey, wait, we're in a holding pattern. We're on pause. We're not committing to anything extra, which is understandable. Again, having lived through, the realities of mergers and acquisitions, I get it, right? You got to be very mindful of your existing contract, let alone new contracts at times like this. But again, the unfortunate, if not ironic thing is that, some of the things that need to happen most don't happen because there's this pause, if you will, this great pause that can occur. Now, again, that's not everywhere, Jason. So I don't want to say that this is what's going to happen here with, Coterra and Devon, but unfortunately, those are the realities sometimes when things are announced. It's, hey, we're in this weird period. We got to wrap things up. Everybody's super busy, and we'll see what happens here when things emerge at, sometime, I guess, in this case, maybe the end of Q2.
And that's a good time to really bring up what my experience has been, because I come from the intangible world where I've been selling air and paper my whole life, advertising and marketing and stories and content. And I've been working in the media since I was 10 years old. And so outside of when I was a newspaper carrier, I've never really had a tangible product to sell. It was always, just intangible, services and that kind of thing. And so I do think it's hard for an oil and gas business to understand the intangible world, because they are the tangible. They are the commodity tangible world. And the example I love to give is when they built the railroads, and especially in the Las Vegas area. Las Vegas is, I think, probably where they discovered it, if I'm thinking about it correctly. But back then, you basically had all these men on camps, and it was fighting and drinking and philandering, and these men were married, and and all this other stuff. As soon as they brought in the pastor, work changed. People stopped drinking at night. I mean, people still did, but enough didn't. Just having that pastor around was an intangible reminder that their wife is back home with the kids. And it reminded them of their upbringing, that, okay, I used to go to church. And so it ignited some morality inside of them, which actually made them more productive at work. And that was one of the most fascinating case studies I've ever read in my life. And it made total sense. It made total sense. That's how I look at what you're doing right now, is that's the type of intangible success that you can bring an organization right now during these merger times. Because that's where my mind was, is that this would be the least amount that a company would hire you, because, we can't even buy lunch for our people right now. Every dime is being counted, and this and that. No, actually, you can make more money right now if you really think about it, because if you get rid of 2 people faster than you needed to, and 2 people advance faster than you thought they were going to, right there, done. I'm paid for. So anyway, I'm not your marketing rep. I'm just in real time here thinking this and processing it through and folding in some historical examples. But I do look at that as where your biggest challenge is the intangible versus the tangible, just ideology, somebody trying to understand it. And so anyway, there's my 2 cents there. You probably want some change, but go ahead.
2 cents. Is that what it's worth? Is that how we're quantifying this intangible value here? 2 cents. See, you just did it unconsciously or unconsciously, Jason. That's good. And if nothing else, I'll assume it was intentional there, because that is a topic that comes up in my one-on-one coaching, and certainly anybody that's been a part of any of my workshops. And it's this concept of quantifying the unquantifiable. That's a tremendous skill, Jason, that real good, strong leaders possess. The ability to translate more focus, more energy, better morale, stronger reputation. For example, companies that invest heavily in outplacement services. That is, hey, we're going to be laying off a bunch of people. We're going to provide some sort of service, whether it's career coaching, resume assistance, some combination of the two. We're going to provide that, one, because it's the right thing to do, but 2, because it's going to help protect our reputation, right? We're not just going to cut and run and here's your severance check. We're going to set you up for success in the long run. So companies do that, Jason. So I want to be clear here, but back to your original question, a lot of times it is just under that umbrella of outplacement, which occurs after the severance and not necessarily in the interim there when things are a bit gray. So, one, I agree wholeheartedly with this idea of quantifying these intangibles, of which there are many. Again, focus, morale, the ability to accelerate certain things. And 2, again, in terms of what I do, it is helping people in sort of an outplacement sort of capacity there, right? But doing it for energy-focused people that are coming out of the energy industry, whether they want to stay in the energy industry or move on to somewhere else. And so, that too, in addition to what we talked about in terms of the sort of the real-time transitional piece, well, it's, hey, once all is said and done and, changes are made, there still is the need for that ongoing support. And, I would say most companies, that is on their radar. That is part of their plan, is to provide, again, not just severance checks and all the stuff that comes typically, but also as part of that, hey, here's support to make sure that, you can continue on. So I'll say that. I guess one other thing I want to say too to that, it's not just a matter of, hey, making sure people can, get off on the right foot or whatever, but, my approach, my bias, if you will, and this might sound a little, I don't know, Tony Robbins-esque or something, but I am absolutely focused on, hey, how do you emerge stronger? You're caught up in this merger and acquisition and all this uncertainty, but from an individual standpoint, what are all the ways that you actually emerge stronger? whether you're let go, whether you're retained, whether you're asked to move. And again, Jason, that might sound a little bit fluffy or touchy-feely, especially for folks in the oil and gas industry, especially for a lot of the technically minded folks that I work with. But I'll tell you what, just asking that question, helping people sit with it and realize that, again, our goal is not to just get back to where we were. It's to say, hey, how does this actually make us stronger? So I'm a big believer in that. How you get to that point can vary for individuals and for companies, but boy, if you're not asking that question and you're just assuming that the only people that are going to be better off than they were before are the shareholders because of all the synergies, then you're really, really, really missing out on opportunities.
Segueing over to the coaching in the sports world, which we like to do some analogies from time to time because it is relatable and comparable, if not from the emotional standpoint, just from the operational standpoint, and especially now that the NFL is in analytics. And so when we take a look at 10 new coaches hired in the NFL, which means probably about 30 changes once general managers and offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, quarterback coach, basically it might even be 50 now that I'm naming some of the secondary coaches and that sort of things. The whole industry's going through the change in the NFL. When a third of the league had new coaching, a third, that's a shift. That is a shift. That's what's going on in the oil and gas industry too. There's so much change and so much shift going on that some people are hiring young, some people are hiring old veterans, some people are trying a brand new thing. Let's give it a shot. And some are doing retreads. Hey, you know what? I think if we gave him the right support here, he could make success. He didn't have it there. Here, it wasn't him, it was them. That type of thing. So, and just timing and chemistry and the whole deal, there's that. You're in Pittsburgh, where they've had 3 coaches, I think, in the last 50 years or something like that. Now they're on their 4th. They went against the grain all other 2 times they hired, where they hired a young person that stayed there for 30 years or whatever. And they went with a Mike McCarthy, who's, I believe, in his 60s already. And therefore, you get 10 years out of them, man, you'd be lucky. So the question is that if you're an executive or you're in the hiring position and you're bringing in somebody who's probably past the retirement age into an organization of young people, that is the first challenge right there. And what makes it interesting is this is where Aaron Rodgers could be the most valuable person on the team, being a conduit between the age gaps, if you will. I've experienced the age gap in ways that I never even thought of, because I was raised in the Midwest as a Catholic, and so I was brought up a certain way that believed people behaved a certain way. And I wasn't naive because, I hung out behind the smoke shack too. I didn't smoke, but I hung out back there. So I was, I was in the detention hall and in the principal's room. So I was no angel, even though I was an altar boy. Yes. So I can say I was an altar boy, but I was no angel. And so I look at it, Joe, where there's so much change going on right now. People are very confused on how chemistry is going to work in the office. And the NFL is showing it incredibly, because at the end of the day, the NFL is basically under 30-year-olds. People under 30, man. And it has nothing to do with talent anymore. It has to do with chemistry and relationships and how you can communicate with each other. Brian Flores, who's a Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator an hour and a half from here where I'm at, he may never get a head coach job because he hurt Tua, the quarterback down in Miami. He hurt his feelings. He was a little bit too rough. And because his feelings were hurt, took it personally, turned it into something bigger than it probably was. And now it has cost his career to where he's still got lawsuits with the NFL going. Might never be a coach again. So I'm not even sure where the question is here, Joe, because there's a lot of just kind of spaghetti against the wall type of analogies and analysis right now. But that's where we're at. That's really where we're at, to where a lot of organizations, especially management, they're afraid. They're afraid to make a leadership move. Leaders are really afraid right now of being wrong. And because being wrong can be the end of a lot of different things. How do you coach that? How do you coach fear out of executives? And how do you coach communication into different generations that they, I honestly, I don't know how to talk to young people very much, because every other sentence I say triggers them somehow. I just,
So, I think there's two questions in there. One on the fear, Jason. So, my go-to when it comes to coaching people on fear and their fear of making a decision, fear of making a wrong decision, is something that has a lot of ties to football and sports, and it's this concept of thinking in bets. Again, not a unique concept to me. Give full credit to Annie Duke, former professional poker player, who wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. And, she basically makes the point that, if you're like Pete Carroll from, what was that, 12 years ago, when he decided to pass the ball instead of just handing it off to Marshawn Lynch, basically lost the Super Bowl. And everybody says, it's the worst decision ever. But was it the worst decision, or was it, a perhaps reasonable decision that had a very, very bad result? And again, you can argue that, no, it was a bad decision, Joe. He should have just handed off the ball. But nevertheless, her point is, look, we as human beings make tens of thousands of decisions each day. They don't all have to be correct. You want to make the best decisions you can with the best data, and the best leaders are the ones who can do that and keep moving forward. The best leaders are like Punxsutawney Phil, who, is comfortable being wrong like 70% of the time or whatever he is. But he still shows up, he still makes those decisions. Now, again, if you're wrong as much as he is, then you know what, you do make bad decisions and you may be a bad leader. But by and large, Jason, it's the law of averages. And again, this is where kind of marrying the soft skills with maybe my engineering hat, my engineering background says, look, let's play the law of averages. If even on big decisions, you're correct 60, 70% of the time, you're doing okay. And that's typically the thread that gets people to at least reduce their fear of making decisions just a little bit, just enough. On the other side, again, I think there was a question there about communication. And I'll say this more as an observer, of course, of everything that's going on in the NFL, especially here in Pittsburgh, where, I ingest my fair share of sports radio driving around. And, one of the things that I've observed is that, leadership, whether it's the GM, whether it's the owners, when they're trying to sell people on something, whether it's a coach, right? And again, there's a lot of attempts to sell the general population here on Mike McCarthy. Some people love him, the homegrown Pittsburgher. There's a lot to love. I'd say probably, I don't know, it feels like maybe 80% of the sports talk radio folks were not terribly thrilled with the hire. But regardless, the failure that I see from a communication standpoint, from a sales standpoint, is that leaders are trying to control the narrative about their decisions to hire somebody. And this is no different within a company too. Whereas where they should be focused is having, individual conversations, or, if not individual conversations, smaller conversations, small group conversations with the people in the locker room, with the captains of the team, the people whose opinion matters. Instead, there's a lot of focus on basically preaching to the masses, preaching to the hundreds of thousands of Steelers fans in this region, probably millions of fans around the world, instead of starting and saying, all right, what are your concerns about Mike McCarthy? If I'm talking to you one-on-one, Jason, and I'm addressing your concerns, you're in the locker room, maybe you're one of the captains, that is where my time should be spent. But what's the human approach? Well, time is limited. I'm going to speak to the masses. I'm going to rationalize. I'm going to put my talking points out there, and then I'll go talk to my team. Then I'll go talk to the people in the locker room who are actually going to be working for this coach, if you will. I see that all the time in business. It's no doubt happening in the world of sports as well. And, so there's my word of caution, right? Whether you're navigating a hire, mergers and acquisitions, you cannot spend enough time speaking with those advocates, with those captains who can then go forth and, represent those concerns, can then go forth and say, hey, you know what? The senior leader here, the owner, the GM, I talked to him. He's got a good feel for, some of the misgivings I have or concerns I have. Let those people be your advocates. But Jason, that takes a little bit of extra effort, takes a little bit of extra time. And guess what? If you're going into this fearful, you might not want to have that conversation because you're scared of what that captain, what that individual, what that locker room might say. So again, I think we touched on fear. I think we touched on communication there, but that's what I see going on in the NFL world that mirrors very, very nicely what goes on constantly in the corporate world, especially in the world of oil and gas, where things are always a changing, Jason.
And you just backdoored into another intangible opportunity for me to point out. You mentioned Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll is older than Mike McCarthy, I do believe, and when he was hired for the Las Vegas Raiders job, they had already said he made the playoffs. He's going to bring them to the Super Bowl. Oh, my goodness. Smartest hire of the coaching carousel. Fired a year later, worst team in the NFL, one of the worst ever. Mike McCarthy, if he had better marketing, he would have been accepted. I mean, the dude has won a Super Bowl. He's one of the most winning coaches. I think he's the second highest winning coach behind John Harbaugh in terms of victories. And honestly, if Mike McCarthy had better public relations and marketing, he wouldn't have 80% of the sports writers saying he's a bust already. I mean, the same people said that Pete Carroll, he was going to take the Raiders to the Super Bowl and take the Raiders to the playoffs. Didn't even barely get 2 wins. So there's the intangible example.
Yeah, but who cares, right? I mean, but you say wins, right? I mean, again, Pete Carroll did not have many wins there in Las Vegas. People want to win. That's it. And what's going to help them win? Well, it's convincing and motivating and, connecting with the players on the team. So if Mike McCarthy has skeptics, if 95% of people in Pittsburgh are skeptics, and they're not, by the way, again, there are a lot of people who are enthralled by the idea of this Pittsburgh or this Yinzer coming home. And again, there's a lot of intangible value there, no doubt. But, let's assume that Mike McCarthy is connecting behind the scenes with his team. Well, that's what's going to lead to wins. And what do people want to see? Wins. Is it a guarantee? Heck no. But, that's leadership, is recognizing, hey, you know what? You have limited time. You have limited energy. Where do I invest that time and energy, Jason? And again, let's trust that he is having those conversations. He is, addressing the elephants in the room about whatever gaps he might bring or, again, concerns that there might be swirling around him. And if he's doing that with the right people and not, quite frankly, wasting his time and energy on, the noise, the chatter, and everything else, well, guess what? He's more than likely not going to have some measure of success.
And before we wrap up here, as I'm looking at the clock, I did want to bring up one more thing, and that has to do with decision fatigue. Some of the things you were talking about earlier had me write down decision fatigue. It is a real thing. And so if you're an executive or you're an employee and you're dealing with all this new decisions like you've never had before, you can actually become unproductive for yourself and your company because as you go throughout the day, your decision-making ability goes down. You become fatigued. It becomes almost like a gas-like state. Brain fog is what they call it. Your brain's limited mental energy doesn't make the best choices. This was very apparent to me coming from the print world because, I came from a time when one spouse worked and there wasn't the internet and we had 3 television channels. That was it. And so when a husband would come home at the end of the day, the wife would want to talk because she hasn't made a decision all day. She only has 3 channels to choose from. Her house chores are already predetermined. She already knows which vacuum she's going to use. She has Tuesday, it's meatball night, whatever, All of her decisions are pretty much done. So she's fresh as a daisy, and then the husband comes home, he's done. He's made so many decisions at the office, he's done. And so that was one of the big early divorce things that you'd see. And me in the print, we could see it happening when the internet came out, because all of a sudden all these quizzes came, and we heard all these teachers talking about how the students were not performing well at the end of the day. Well, it turns out they were overstimulating them during the day. All these new questions, and like, but basically what I'm saying is everybody used to get, like, say, 2% milk. Well, now it's, do you want 1%? Do you want skim? Do you want just those little decisions is what I'm talking about. Leaders ended up becoming holders of the multiple choices. And so this is a time for leaders to rise up again. Leaders need to understand that decision fatigue is real. It impacts families, it impacts people in a real way. And so having somebody to help you understand decision fatigue, or understand the decisions so you don't get as fatigued, that to me is one of the most invaluable things right now. But I'm biased because, again, I came from the print industry where we were part of somebody's decision at one point and we got taken out by the digital world. And so it changed. We saw, it was part of the paradigm shift. And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that is something pretty important. And actually, I think your business could probably help people quite a bit with that.
Yeah, although I think I need to be clear. If anybody's half listening, Jason, I heard you talking about, maybe the stereotypical situation decades ago as far as the wife and her role and everything else. So I want to be clear here. I'm all for leaning into stereotypes that we've talked about in terms of Italian Americans and engineers and Pittsburghers / Yinzers and everything else. But I'm going to be careful here and tread lightly when it comes to those other stereotypes.
Isn't that crazy how you can just trigger people by just say? I mean, that's what I'm talking about, though. I'm being totally serious. Where
sure,
making an observation like that, I would have triggered women under the age of 30 right there by saying that back then a lot of it was very common for just the one spouse to work.
Sure.
And 99% of the time it was the man that did it. But again, I was born last century, and so I'm a little bit older than the average bear, I guess, and I have to admit that now. So
but here's the thing, Jason. I mean,
yeah.
You talk about words, right, or language, or examples, or anecdotes, or whatever, and how, again, unfortunately, in this day and age, you need to be extra careful. And what does that do? That drains you, right? It reduces your energy. So you talk about the drain of making decisions throughout a day. Well, it's becoming even worse now. Hey, I need to choose my words, especially now with social media or press releases or whatever. And then, oh, by the way, I've got these AI tools that I can use to help polish my language. How much extra time and energy is that actually costing? Because people are second guessing themselves, or they have AI second guessing themselves. And so, Jason, what you're describing is real. The challenge, if not inability, especially towards the end of a day, to make a simple decision because you are so darn tired. So first of all, it's real. There's no question that it's real. In terms of how I help individuals, well, I got to give credit to somebody who helped my wife and I over a decade ago. We were doing a renovation here at the house, literally thousands of decisions, thousands of little decisions on where stuff goes and the position of a light switch and the colors and everything else. And that architect often would say to my wife and I, who again are like, you're wrestling with these decisions, you're doing all this research. She'd say, you got to the point where there's no bad decision. And in some cases, that's true, and that's healthy, and it was necessary to say, look, option A versus option B, odds are we're going to be happy with either one, and we're probably never going to think about it again. Now, again, that's not every decision. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not dismissing the importance of making decisions from a leadership standpoint, from if you're a leader of a multi-billion-dollar company, Jason. But sometimes they need somebody independent, like that architect was for us, or like I am as a coach for leaders in the energy industry, to say, okay, so what? What are the real implications of this decision? Let's look at the two different pathways here. You choose option A versus option B. Does it really make a difference? And if so, what is the impact? And sometimes the impact can be big, and that is a big decision, and that requires the energy. But so often, Jason, you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And helping individuals get to the point where they recognize that not every decision matters as much, and that, as we've said before, as human beings, we make upwards of 30,000 discrete decisions a day. Most of them we don't think about, but imagine if we did. Imagine if we actually made a decision on whether I, raise my hand or look left or right or blink or speak up or choose this word or whatever. Again, we would be inundated. We wouldn't be able to do anything. And even leaders at the highest level, the most successful leaders that you can think of, they still struggle, and they struggle more and more today because of all the input, because of all the noise, because of all the stress and anxiety and everything else that comes with living in 2026, Jason. So finding out when you can say, hey, how much does it actually matter? So what? As simple as that is, Jason, that's some of the most helpful support that I give as a coach for individuals tasked with making big decisions.
I couldn't even imagine what it would be like in a lot of the executive rooms right now with the way the language is so exaggerated to where if I mean there are people that will go out and say close $1 million deal and they'll come back and they'll get in trouble because it's not 5 million or something like that. It's like, oh well, we were expecting more, or the self hype that people can give. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got, and I just pass this along to anybody out there who might feel that, you know, they're working their tail off and maybe they're not getting all the best recognition that they should and that sort of thing. Like, because when you're in the media, you're putting out stuff all the time. I mean, I was in the magazine business and on the radio, so I had daily talk shows and monthly articles. So I was a subject to a lot of criticism I didn't ask for. Go to the grocery store, picking up milk. All of a sudden, somebody's telling you how much they didn't like you. Okay, great, thanks. Glad we could have this talk, and you still want to go fishing. Okay, great. Can't wait to sit in a boat with you for 2 hours. You know, that type of thing. But I got to the point because one of my mentors, I watched him do it in real time, and I took it from him after that, which was, well, they're not all award winners, and you just walk away like, hey, you know what? Hey, I'm not gonna hit a 3-pointer every time. Sometimes a free throw's enough. Go ahead.
No, that's a great way to put it, Jason. I guess one other thing I'll say to kind of put a bow on this thread here is that, you know, when I'm working with individuals, again, sometimes people are scared by the concept of, oh, you're an executive coach. Listen, my approach doesn't matter whether you are an executive, whether you're an intern. I'm asking questions. I'm helping you think more consciously, more clearly. And quite frankly, you know, even when I'm working with a group of interns, I'm helping them think like an executive. And what do executives do? Well, they should be able to recognize that, you know what? Sometimes $5 or $10 does make a big difference, right? Depending on the context. And sometimes $5 or $10 million is sort of a whatever, you know, it doesn't really matter. You know, that's a part of executive presence. That's part of thinking like an executive is well, recognizing context, right? And, you know, that's the key, Jason. That's the key for all of these types of things we're talking about when it comes to making a decision, when it comes to the fact that, yes, you know what, not everything has to be an award-winning, you know, piece of literature that you've put out there, you know, that's okay. And the ability to sort through and recognize when, you know, things really do matter and when they don't, and then to be able to communicate that, and especially communicate it upwards when you're not, you know, the most senior person in the room, that's executive presence. That's confidence. And that's going to help, theoretically, your stakeholders achieve what they want to achieve because you're thinking about things consciously. And again, that's my whole thing, right? It's conscious leadership. Heck, I named a whole company after that idea, right? Witting Partners. The whole idea that a lot of people are unwittingly putting too much energy into small decisions when, you know, they might not matter that much. So you want to be conscious. You want to be witting, if you will, and recognize that, hey, you know what? If you're not looking at things with the right context and putting the right amount of energy into a given decision, well, you know, that's a recipe for disaster, no matter who you are, what your role is, and, you know, what industry you're in, quite frankly.
His name is Joe Sinnott. His company is called Witting Partners. He's an executive coach. He's a former oil and gas professional, now helping people in all walks of life create some synergy for themselves and others. And his new podcast is up and running. Season 7 kicks off, The Energy Detox, recorded in the end of the January month for the winter storm. And he's talking about some weathermen. And what's the theme of the podcast as we conclude here, Joe? Your new podcast, Season 7, kicked off.
Well, we kicked off, interestingly enough, Jason, with a lot of the themes that we talked about today in terms of making decisions, being comfortable being wrong like a weatherman, like Punxsutawney Phil, and making sure that, again, you make the decision with the best data you have and you keep moving forward because that's what your people want.
I would have a hard time being a weatherman outside of Southern California. I mean, the amount of people who have been very animate with the language towards me over the years, and Dude, I was in mostly soft features. Like I wasn't even doing hard news. You know what I mean? I could imagine being the weather where you're wrong over 50% of the time. You go to the store and man, oh boy, they probably throw tomatoes at you for all we know, snowballs and all kinds of different things. But
Well, again,
I,
Jason, it is context, right? You gotta read the room.
yes,
And I'll say, real quick here, even this year, after Punxsutawney Phil announced that he saw his shadow, and I haven't gone back and rewatched it, but kids were watching over breakfast. I think there was actually audible groans and if not boos in Punxsutawney because of the winter that we've had so far, how frigid it's been, how actually, in fact, it was so cold that they didn't do the usual. They didn't provide the usual opportunity for people to go up on stage and take pictures with Phil because it was too cold. So again, I think even this year, people have turned on Punxsutawney Phil. Even after they were up there reveling into the well, from night into the wee hours this morning. So to your
wasn't quite
point,
the
Jason,
party.
yeah, you got to recognize sort of what your audience has been dealing with before you open your mouth and make your prediction.
Now we're in the new world, 2026. So, folks, if you need some coaching done, Joe Sinnott is his name. And any final thoughts here, sir?
I guess final thought, Jason. Obviously, what spurred some of this conversation on was announced merger acquisition with synergies, and everybody knows what synergies means in the corporate world. So, the one final thing I would tell anybody out there, whether you're in the midst of a synergistic transaction or whether you're actually in a pretty comfortable state right now, make sure you can articulate what you do differently from anybody else. And I mean anybody else, Jason. A lot of people struggle with this, but answer the question here. I am the only what? And suspend humility. Don't worry about patting yourself on the back because if you can't articulate what makes you different from everybody else, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle with confidence. And quite frankly, you might struggle to convince the powers that be to keep you on or to hire you on for a new role. So again, if nothing else, Jason, no matter where you are in life, stop for a second, take a moment and answer that question. Again, I am the only fill in the blank. So that's my last piece of advice, Jason, that is especially important here as we continue to navigate the world of oil and gas M&A.
Just noticed we're wearing the same shirt, too. That's interesting. Little light blue collared shirt. All right. Didn't get the memo, but apparently I followed through with it. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with Joe Sinnott again. And that's it. I don't really have an outro today, so we'll see you, folks.